The memorial hall had grown completely silent. Every veteran, every officer, every server had stopped what they were doing to stare at Commander Vexthar. The old Kelthari warrior stood in the center of the room, his scarred shell reflecting the soft lights above him. General Morthax was the first to break the silence. The massive Drenari leaned back in his chair and let out a rumbling laugh. "The humans? You wish to speak about the humans, Commander? Those small, soft creatures who could barely survive a single campaign?" "I do," Vexthar replied calmly. "Then speak quickly, for there is little to say. The humans were useful for support roles, I suppose. They could carry supplies and tend to wounded soldiers. But they were hardly warriors." Several officers around the room nodded in agreement. Even Admiral Kreeneth seemed amused, her bioluminescent skin flickering with soft light. Vexthar did not react to their dismissal. Instead, he turned slowly, making eye contact with as many veterans as he could. "Tell me, General, have you ever heard of the Battle of Crestfall Station?" Morthax waved one of his four hands dismissively. "A minor engagement. The Voreth overran a supply station. It was lost." "It was not lost," Vexthar said. "I know this because I was there." The amusement in the room began to fade. Vexthar was not known for exaggeration. If he said he was there, then he was there. "Crestfall Station was not a minor supply depot," Vexthar continued. "It was the main communication hub for the entire 7th Sector. When the Voreth attacked, they brought 3 battlecruisers and over 10,000 ground troops. We had a garrison of 4,000 Kelthari soldiers and no hope of reinforcement." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. The veterans knew what those odds meant. The battle lasted for 2 days. By the end of the first day, half my soldiers were dead. By the middle of the second day, we had been pushed back to the lower decks. 3,000 of us were trapped in the maintenance levels with no way to reach the evacuation ships. The Voreth were burning through our defenses one corridor at a time. Vexthar's voice grew softer, but somehow it carried even further in the silent hall. I had accepted death. I told my soldiers to prepare for the end. Some prayed to their gods. Others wrote final messages to their families that would never be sent. We waited for the Voreth to break through the last door. And then my communications officer received a signal. A single ship had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. It was a human frigate called the Wandering Star, commanded by Captain Ben Hardy. Admiral Kreeneth leaned forward slightly. "1 frigate against 3 battlecruisers?" "Yes, 1 frigate." Captain Hardy had been fighting a running battle against Voreth raiders for 18 standard hours before he arrived at Crestfall. His ship was damaged. His crew of 40 had been reduced to 11 survivors. He was low on ammunition, low on fuel, and his vessel was leaking atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. Vexthar looked directly at General Morthax. Any commander with sense would have retreated. Any commander following proper military doctrine would have calculated the odds and jumped away to save his remaining crew. That is what we would have done. That is what we were trained to do. But Ben Hardy was human. He sent me a message. I still remember his exact words. He said, "Hold tight, Commander. We are coming to get you." A murmur passed through the crowd. Lieutenant Commander Tresh, of the Mulvari Union, spoke for the first time, his quiet voice cutting through the whispers. "What could 1 damaged frigate do against such a force?" "More than any of us thought possible," Vexthar answered. Hardy flew his ship directly at the Voreth formation. He did not attack them head-on. He was not stupid. Instead, he used the debris field around the station as cover. He would appear, fire everything he had, and disappear before they could target him properly. For 6 hours he did this. 6 hours. His ship was falling apart around him. His crew was collapsing from exhaustion. But every time the Voreth tried to concentrate their forces on us, Hardy would strike from a different angle and draw them away. During those 6 hours, we managed to reach the emergency evacuation tunnels. We fought our way to the surface. We reached a landing pad where 3 transport ships were still functional. And all the while, we could see Hardy's ship dancing through space, trailing fire and smoke, refusing to die. The memory was still painful, even after all these years. When the last transport lifted off with my surviving soldiers, Hardy finally tried to retreat, but his engines were too damaged. The Vorath caught him and tore his ship apart. We thought he was dead. But humans are difficult to kill. When our rescue teams reached the wreckage, they found Hardy still alive in what remained of his command deck. He had sealed himself in an emergency survival pod at the last moment. His ship was destroyed, but he survived. I went to see him on the medical ship. When I arrived, the human doctors told me he had been awake for 29 hours straight. He had 3 broken ribs, his left lung had collapsed from the pressure changes, his skin was covered in radiation burns from a damaged reactor. He should have been unconscious, or dead. But when I entered his room, he was sitting up in bed, arguing with a nurse about when he could return to duty. A few nervous laughs echoed through the hall. Vexthar did not smile. I walked to his bed, and I thanked him. I told him that he had saved 3,000 Kalthari lives with his actions. I told him that his bravery would be remembered forever by my people. Do you know what he said to me? The room was silent. He looked at me with those strange human eyes, and he smiled, and he said, "Sorry it took so long, Commander. We hit some traffic." Then he fell unconscious. The doctors rushed to help him, but he was still smiling. Vexthar let those words hang in the air for a long moment. This is the first truth about humans that you need to understand. They do not stop, not when they are exhausted, not when they are wounded, not when every calculation says they should retreat. They simply do not stop. We Kalthari can fight for days without rest. The Draenari can ignore wounds that would kill lesser species. The Vorlani can endure conditions that would destroy organic minds. But humans, with their soft bodies and their short lives, have something that we do not. They have a stubbornness that defies all logic. They have a refusal to surrender that goes beyond training or discipline. When a human decides that something must be done, they will do it or die trying. And even death does not always stop them. Ben Hardy should have run. Any sane commander would have run. But he heard 3,000 strangers calling for help, and he decided that running was not acceptable. So he stayed. He fought. He nearly died. And he apologized for being late. Vexthar looked around the room at the assembled veterans. Some looked thoughtful. Others looked uncomfortable. General Morthax had stopped laughing. "That is the first truth about humans," Vexthar said. "And I have more truths to share, if you are willing to listen." No one told him to stop. No one asked him to sit down. The silence was invitation enough. And so, Commander Vexthar continued, ready to tell them about the second truth that he had learned about humans during the long years of war. Commander Vexthar stood in the center of the memorial hall, surrounded by veterans who had fallen silent. The story of Ben Hardy and the Battle of Crestfall Station had wiped the smiles from their faces. Even General Morthax, who had dismissed the humans so easily, now watched the old Kalthari commander with serious eyes. Lieutenant Commander Tresh of the Molvari Union broke the silence. His voice was calm and measured, as always, but there was curiosity beneath his words. "Commander Vexthar, your story is impressive. But one exceptional individual does not represent an entire species. Perhaps this Captain Hardy was simply unusual among his kind." Vexthar turned to face the Molvari officer. His compound eyes reflected the memorial lights like scattered stars. "You raise a fair point, Lieutenant Commander. One hero could be an accident, a mistake of nature. So let me tell you another story. Let me tell you about Sergeant Amy Nolan." He began to walk slowly around the hall, his clawed feet clicking softly against the polished floor. The veterans turned in their seats to follow him with their eyes. During the 3rd year of the war, I was assigned to lead a reconnaissance mission on a planet called Varith Minor. It was a contested world, changing hands between Coalition and Vorith forces every few months. My job was simple. Take a small team behind enemy lines, gather information about their defensive positions, and return. I selected 6 of my best scouts. We were all veterans. We had trained for years. We knew every trick, every technique, every method of survival. We believed we were prepared for anything. Vexthar stopped walking near a table where several Vorlani officers were seated. They looked up at him with their large, glowing eyes. We were wrong. The Vorith had set a trap. When we reached our observation point, they hit us with everything they had. Plasma fire, explosive rounds, and hunting beasts that could track us by our body heat. Within the first hour, 2 of my scouts were dead. Within the second hour, we were pinned inside a collapsed building with no way out. I sent a distress signal on the emergency frequency. I did not expect a response. We were 12 kilometers behind enemy lines. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. I sent the signal only because protocol required it. He paused, looking around at his audience. You must understand something about that time. The Kelthari and the humans had only been allies for 3 cycles. We had signed the coalition treaty, but we barely knew each other. There was no deep friendship between our species, no bonds of brotherhood. We were strangers who happened to be fighting the same enemy. The human firebase that received my signal was commanded by Lieutenant Victor Dunn. He was a careful officer who followed rules and regulations. When Sergeant Amy Nolan brought him my distress call, he refused to authorize a rescue mission. He said it was too dangerous. He said there was no strategic value in saving 7 Kelthari scouts. He said, correctly, that any rescue attempt would likely result in the deaths of whoever tried it. Admiral Kreeneth spoke up. That seems like a reasonable decision. Military resources should not be wasted on missions with no chance of success. Yes, Vexthar agreed. It was perfectly reasonable. It was exactly what any sensible commander would decide. Lieutenant Dunn was following proper protocol. No one could have blamed him for leaving us to die. But Amy Nolan was not a sensible commander. She was a sergeant who had never met a Kelthari before. She had never spoken to any of us. She did not know our names or our faces. But she heard us calling for help, and something inside her would not let her walk away. Vexthar returned to the center of the hall, standing directly beneath the holographic memorial display. Nolan went to the barracks and found 4 other humans who felt the same way. Private Danny Cortez was barely 20 years old, a boy by human standards. Corporal Lisa Vance had served only 2 years and had never seen heavy combat. Specialist Matt Huang was a technician who spent most of his time repairing equipment. Medic Claire Santos had joined the military to save lives, not take them. None of them were heroes. None of them were special forces or elite soldiers. They were ordinary humans doing ordinary jobs. But when Nolan asked them to help her rescue 7 alien strangers, they all said yes. They stole a transport vehicle in the middle of the night. They drove it out of the base without authorization. They headed straight into enemy territory, knowing that if they were caught, they would be killed. They did all of this for people they had never met. Vexthar's voice grew heavier with emotion. The journey to our position should have taken 2 hours. It took them 5. The Voreth had patrols everywhere. Nolan and her team had to fight through 3 separate ambushes before they reached us. During the second ambush, Cortez took a plasma bolt to his shoulder. The wound was severe. He should have stopped. He should have turned back. He did not stop. He wrapped the wound with a bandage that Santos gave him, and he kept fighting with one arm. When they finally reached our collapsed building, we were down to our last ammunition. 2 more of my scouts had died from their wounds. The 5 of us who remained were preparing to make a final stand. Then the wall exploded inward, and Amy Nolan came through the smoke with her weapon firing. Vexthar made a sound that his comrades recognized as a Kelthari expression of deep respect. The next hour was chaos. Santos treated our wounded, while enemy fire shattered the walls around her. She did not flinch, she did not run, she simply kept working, pulling broken bodies back together with steady hands. Huam used his technical skills to seal the building and create a defensive perimeter. Vance and Cortez held the entrance, pouring fire into any Voreth who came close. And Nolan led us out, step by step, fighting for every meter of ground. 3 kilometers from the base, our transport broke down. We had to walk the rest of the way. The Voreth followed us the entire distance. By the time we reached safety, Cortez had been shot twice more. Vance had a piece of metal in her leg. Huang was carrying one of my unconscious scouts on his back. Santos was half dead from exhaustion. But all 5 surviving Kelthari made it home. Every single one of us. When we returned to the base, Lieutenant Dunn was furious. He had Nolan arrested for disobeying direct orders. She faced a military tribunal that could have ended her career and sent her to prison. Vexthar paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. The judges asked her why she had done it, why she had risked her life and the lives of her friends for aliens she had never met, why she had disobeyed her commanding officer for strangers. She looked at them, this small human woman with tired eyes and dirt on her face, and she said, "They were calling for help. We could hear them calling for help. What else were we supposed to do?" The hall was completely silent. That is the second truth about humans. They will fight and bleed and die for complete strangers, not because of treaties or orders or strategic value. They do it because someone needs help, and they cannot ignore that need. It seems to be built into them, like breathing or heartbeat. When humans hear a cry for help, they respond. They cannot seem to stop themselves. Amy Nolan did not know us. We were strange creatures from another world. But she heard us calling, and she came running into fire to save us. She was not unusual among her kind. She was typical. And that, my friends, is what makes humans so remarkable. Vexthar looked at the assembled veterans, his old eyes filled with memories of that distant battle. "Are you ready to hear the third truth?" he asked. No one spoke, but every head in the room nodded, eager to hear more about the strange, soft creatures called humans. The silence in the memorial hall had grown deep and heavy. Commander Vexthar could feel the weight of attention from every veteran in the room. They were no longer smiling or boasting. They were listening, truly listening for perhaps the first time in many years. Admiral Kreeneth stood slowly from her seat. Her bioluminescent skin had dimmed to a soft, thoughtful glow. "Commander Vexthar, your stories have given us much to consider. I confess that I have underestimated the humans. Their determination is impressive. Their willingness to help strangers is admirable." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But surely there are limits to human endurance. They are, after all, biological creatures with fragile bodies. There must be things that even they cannot bear." Vexthar nodded slowly. "You would think so, Admiral. Many species break under the weight of loss and grief. War destroys minds as easily as it destroys bodies. But let me tell you about Black Hollow Ridge, and you may understand humans a little better." He walked toward the holographic display at the center of the hall and touched the controls with his clawed fingers. The image shifted, showing a barren landscape covered in gray ash and black rock. Craters dotted the ground like wounds. The twisted remains of fortifications stood against a sky filled with smoke. "This is Black Hollow Ridge," Vexthar said, "or what was left of it after the battle. It was the key to the entire Voreth defensive network in the Gamma sector. If we controlled the ridge, we could cut their supply lines and isolate half their forces. If we failed, the war would drag on for another decade." General Morthax grunted from his seat. His forearms were crossed over his massive chest. "I remember Black Hollow. The Drenari Third Army fought there. We lost many good soldiers." "Yes," Vexthar agreed, "you did. So did the Vorlani. So did the Molvari. So did everyone who set foot on that cursed rock." The coalition sent a joint force of 12,000 soldiers from 6 species. The humans contributed a single battalion of 500 warriors under the command of Colonel Sam Reyes. 500 humans among 12,000 soldiers, a small fraction. Many commanders questioned why they were even included. Vexthar turned off the hologram and faced his audience directly. The battle began on the first day of the 5th month. The Voreth were dug in deep. They had been fortifying the ridge for 3 years. They had underground tunnels, automated weapons, and reserves hidden in bunkers that our scanners could not detect. They were ready for us. The first assault failed within 6 hours. The second assault on the 3rd day pushed forward but could not hold the ground we gained. The Voreth counterattacked at night and drove us back. By the end of the 4th day, the Vorlani contingent had retreated to regroup. Admiral Kryneth's skin flickered with discomfort, but she did not deny it. By the 6th day, the Drenari Third Army pulled back to reinforce their defensive line. The casualties were too high. The gains were too small. General Morthax said nothing, but his 4 hands tightened into fists. By the 8th day, only the humans remained on the ridge. The room stirred with surprise. Lieutenant Commander Tresh leaned forward in his seat. 500 humans held the ridge alone against the entire Voreth garrison? 312 humans, Vexthar corrected. Nearly 200 had died in the first week. But Colonel Reyes refused to withdraw. He said his orders were to take the ridge, and he intended to follow those orders. I watched through long-range sensors as the humans dug in. They turned every crater into a fighting position. They connected their holes with trenches. They built walls from the bodies of dead Voreth and broken machines. They did everything possible to survive. But the thing that struck me most was not their defense. It was what they did between the Voreth attacks. Vexthar's voice dropped lower. Whenever there was a pause in the fighting, teams of humans would crawl out into the open ground. They would search through the smoke and the ash, and they would bring back their dead. I did not understand at first. I thought they were searching for supplies or weapons. But they ignored the equipment. They only took the bodies. Every single fallen human soldier was carried back to the main position and placed carefully in a protected area behind the lines. The Voreth noticed this behavior. They began targeting the recovery teams. Soldiers who went out to collect the dead were shot down. Colonel Reyes lost 30 more soldiers just in recovery operations. I sent him a message. I asked him to stop. I told him that the dead were beyond helping. I told him that he was throwing away living soldiers to retrieve empty shells. Do you know what he told me? The veterans waited in silence. He said, "They came here trusting us to bring them home. So we bring them home." Vexthar's mandibles clicked softly with emotion. I did not understand. Among my people, we honor the dead with words and memories. The body is just a container. Once the spirit leaves, the shell has no importance. We would never risk living soldiers to recover empty containers. But humans see it differently. To them, the body is not just a shell. It is the last physical connection between the dead soldier and the family waiting at home. It is proof that their loved one existed, that they mattered, that they did not simply vanish into the void of space. Colonel Reyes kept sending out recovery teams. Every pause in the fighting, every brief moment of silence, his soldiers would crawl into the killing ground and drag their fallen comrades back. Some of them died doing it, and then other soldiers would go out and recover them too. When reinforcements finally arrived on the 9th day, the humans were still holding the ridge. Only 108 of the original 500 were still able to fight. The rest were dead or too wounded to stand. But every single fallen soldier was accounted for. Every one. The recovery team that relieved the humans found the bodies laid out in neat rows behind the main position. Each body had been wrapped in whatever cloth or material the soldiers could find. Each body had a name tag placed on the chest. Each body was treated with respect and care, even as the battle raged around them. The rescue commander asked Colonel Reyes how he had managed to keep fighting with so few soldiers. Reyes looked at the rows of dead behind him and said, "We were never alone. They were with us the whole time." Vexstar fell silent for a long moment. The memorial hall was so quiet that the soft hum of the station systems could be heard. This is the third truth about humans. They carry their dead. They remember every name. They honor every sacrifice. And they never, ever leave their people behind. We fight wars to win territory and resources. Humans fight wars to protect their people. And that protection does not end when the heart stops beating. It continues until the body is returned home, until the family can say goodbye, until the name is carved into a memorial wall. The humans have a saying, "No one left behind." It is not just a military phrase, it is a promise. And humans keep their promises, even when the cost is terrible. Admiral Krynef's glow had dimmed to almost nothing. General Morthax sat motionless, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Lieutenant Commander Tresh had lowered his head in what seemed like respect. Vexstar looked around at the changed mood of the room. "I have one more truth to share," he said quietly. "The harshest truth of all. Are you ready to hear it?" The veterans nodded, their pride forgotten, their boasts silenced. They wanted to understand these strange creatures called humans. They needed to understand. And Vexstar prepared to tell them the final truth. Commander Vexstar stood alone in the center of the memorial hall. The holographic display above him cast soft light across his scarred shell. Around him, the greatest warriors of 6 species sat in silence, waiting for his final words. He had told them about Ben Hardy, who flew a broken ship into battle because strangers needed saving. He had told them about Amy Nolan, who disobeyed orders to rescue aliens she had never met. He had told them about Sam Reyes and the soldiers of Black Hollow Ridge, who risked their lives to bring their fallen comrades home. Now it was time for the final truth. Young Lieutenant Zinala spoke from the back of the room. Her voice was soft, but it carried clearly through the silence. "Commander, you have called these harsh truths, but what you have described sounds like heroism. How are these truths harsh?" Vexstar turned to look at his young aide. In that moment, he looked very old. The weight of 300 years pressed down on his shoulders, and his compound eyes seemed dimmer than before. "They are harsh, Lieutenant, because they force us to see what we are not." He gestured toward the assembled veterans. "Look around this room. We are the heroes of 6 great civilizations. We have conquered worlds and destroyed fleets. We have lived for centuries and mastered the arts of war. Our bodies are stronger, faster, and more durable than any human could hope to be. The Kelthari have shells that can stop bullets. The Drenari have forearms and the strength to tear metal apart. The Vorlani can survive in the vacuum of space. The Molvari have senses that miss nothing. We evolved on worlds that shaped us into perfect warriors. And what are humans? They are soft creatures, covered in thin, fragile skin. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. They evolved on a planet that tried to kill them in 1,000 different ways, and they survived through nothing but cleverness and cooperation. Vexthar began to pace slowly, his clawed feet clicking against the floor. Humans live for barely 80 years. Some of them die even younger. They know from the moment they are old enough to understand that their time is short. Every human walks through life with death standing close behind them. We Kelthari can live for 500 years. We have time to master our crafts, to become perfect soldiers, to train until fighting becomes as natural as breathing. Humans do not have that luxury. They must learn quickly. They must fight with incomplete training. They must face enemies that are bigger, stronger, and better equipped. And yet, when the war came, it was the humans who taught us what courage truly means. Admiral Kreeneth stirred in her seat. What do you mean, Commander? We all showed courage in the war. Did we? Vexthar stopped pacing and faced the Admiral directly. I have watched humans in battle. I have seen the fear in their eyes. They are terrified, Admiral. They are always terrified. Their hearts beat faster. Their hands shake. Their bodies scream at them to run, to hide, to survive, but they do not run. They push the fear down. They grip their weapons tighter. They step forward into the fire, knowing that they might die, knowing that they probably will die, and they do it anyway. That is courage. Not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. Humans feel the same terror that would paralyze lesser creatures, and they fight through it with nothing but willpower. He looked around the room. Can any of us say the same? Can any of us claim to feel true fear when we go into battle? Our bodies protect us. Our long lives make death seem distant. Our advantages make us confident. Humans have no such comfort. Every battle might be their last. Every wound might be fatal. Every moment of survival is a victory against impossible odds. And still they fight. Still they help strangers. Still they carry their dead. Vexthar's voice grew quieter. I have one more story to tell. After the war ended, the human government invited me to Earth to receive an award. They wanted to honor me for my cooperation with their forces. It was a great ceremony in a beautiful city. When the ceremony was over, I walked through the streets with a human escort. I wanted to see this planet that had produced such remarkable warriors. What I found surprised me. I saw children playing in parks. I saw families sharing meals. I saw artists painting pictures and musicians playing instruments. I saw people laughing and crying and living ordinary lives. And I realized something important. These humans were not bred for war. They were not warrior races who lived for battle. They were ordinary people, doctors and teachers and farmers and builders, who had set aside their normal lives to fight because something needed to be done. A little girl saw me on the street. She was perhaps 7 years old, small even by human standards. She looked at my scars and my strange body, and she tugged on her mother's hand. I heard her ask, "Was that alien hurt, fighting the bad ones?" The mother started to pull her away, embarrassed by her daughter's question. But before she could answer, the little girl walked up to me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of candy, wrapped in bright paper. Vexthar's mandibles spread in a Kelthari smile. She held it out to me and said, "This makes everything feel better." Even General Morthax had tears forming in his eyes, though he would never admit it. I took the candy. I still have it, actually. I keep it in my quarters as a reminder. That little girl was not a soldier. She had never seen a battle. She had no reason to care about a scarred alien stranger. But she saw someone who looked like they had been hurt, and her first instinct was kindness. This is the final truth about humans, the harshest truth of all. Vexthar looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every veteran. Humans are not monsters. They are not unfeeling war machines. They are kind, fragile, terrified creatures who choose, every single day, to be brave anyway. They choose to help strangers. They choose to never give up. They choose to honor their fallen. They choose to offer candy to scarred alien commanders. They choose to be human. And that choice, made over and over again in the face of fear and pain and death, is what won us the war. We fought because it was our nature. Humans fought because they decided it was the right thing to do. There is a difference, a profound difference. Vexthar walked slowly toward the exit of the memorial hall. At the doorway he stopped and turned back one last time. Remember the humans, my friends. They are gone now, most of them. Their short lives burned out while we were still celebrating our victory. But what they taught us should never be forgotten. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite fear. And kindness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength of all. The humans showed us both. We would do well to learn from their example. Commander Vexthar walked out of the memorial hall, leaving 6 species of veterans sitting in stunned silence. They had come to celebrate their own glory. They left understanding that the true heroes of the war were small, soft creatures who lived brief lives and chose to make those lives matter. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. But somewhere among them, on a small blue planet called Earth, children were still playing, families were still sharing meals, and a species that had once saved the galaxy was living out its ordinary, extraordinary existence. And in the memorial hall of the Endless Vigil, the greatest warriors of the Coalition finally raised their glasses in a toast they had never given before. To the humans, may their memory live forever. The orbital station, called Endless Vigil, floated silently in the darkness between stars. It was an old station, built during the early days of the Great Coalition, and its metal walls held memories of a terrible war that had nearly destroyed everything. Tonight, those walls would hear stories that few had ever spoken aloud. Commander Vexthar of the Kelthari Empire stood near a viewing window, watching the distant lights of passing ships. His body was covered in a hard shell that his species had evolved over millions of years. That shell was now marked with deep scars, burns, and the faded lines of old wounds. Each mark told a story. Each scar was a battle survived. He had lived for over 300 years, and he had spent most of that time fighting. The memorial hall behind him was filling with guests. Veterans from 6 different species had traveled great distances to attend this gathering. It was the 10th anniversary of the Great Coalition victory, the day when the Allied forces had finally defeated the Voreth Horde and ended a war that had consumed entire star systems. Vexthar turned away from the window and observed the crowd. He saw Admiral Kreeneth of the Vorlani Collective standing near the center of the room. Her body was tall and thin, covered in smooth skin that glowed with soft blue light. She was laughing at something one of her officers had said, and her light flickered brighter with each laugh. Kreeneth had commanded the largest fleet in the Coalition, and she never let anyone forget it. Near the food tables, General Morthax of the Drenari Dominion was surrounded by admirers. The Drenari were massive creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 powerful arms, and thick gray skin that could stop most weapons. Morthax was considered the greatest ground commander of the war, and his deep voice echoed through the hall as he described one of his famous victories. Lieutenant Commander Tresh of the Molvari Union stood quietly in a corner, his 8 eyes watching everything. The Molvari were patient creatures who preferred to observe rather than speak. Tresh had led special operations teams behind enemy lines, and his silent nature had served him well in that role. Vexthar knew all of them. He had fought beside them, argued with them, and watched them make decisions that cost thousands of lives. They were heroes, all of them. But tonight, as he listened to their stories and their boasts, he felt something heavy in his chest. Something was missing from their celebrations. A young Kalthari officer approached him. Lieutenant Zinala was his aide, assigned to him after the war ended. She was barely 50 years old, still a child by Kalthari standards, and she had never seen real combat. Her shell was smooth and unmarked, and her compound eyes were bright with curiosity. "Commander," she said, "the ceremony will begin soon. Admiral Kryneth wishes to know if you will speak tonight." Vexthar made a soft clicking sound with his mandibles. It was a sound of uncertainty. "What would I say that has not already been said 1,000 times?" "You could tell them about the Battle of Crestfall Station," Zinala suggested. "Or the Siege of Varath Minor. Your victories are legendary." "My victories," Vexthar repeated the words slowly, as if tasting something bitter. "Yes, everyone speaks of their victories tonight, but I noticed something strange, Lieutenant. Can you tell me what it is?" Zinala looked around the room, trying to understand what her commander meant. She saw Verlani admirals sharing drinks with Tranari generals. She saw Molvari agents exchanging quiet words with Kalthari officers. Representatives from the Thanori Republic and the Nexan Federation mingled freely with the others. "I am not sure what you mean, Commander," she admitted. "Where are the humans?" Vexthar asked. Zinala's antenna twitched. She looked around the room again, more carefully this time. "I do not see any humans here tonight." "No, you do not. And when our comrades tell their stories of glory and victory, do you hear them mention the humans?" "Now that you say it, no, I have not heard anyone speak of them." Vexthar nodded slowly. His old body felt tired, but his mind was sharp and clear. "The humans were our allies in this war. They fought beside us for 7 years. They bled with us. They died with us. And yet tonight, at this great gathering of heroes, no one speaks their name." "Perhaps they were not invited," Zinala said. "They were invited. I made sure of it myself. But humans do not live as long as we do. Most of the humans I fought beside are already dead. Not from battle, but from simple old age. Their lives burn bright and fast, like stars that cannot last. The few who remain are too old or too tired to travel so far." Zinala considered this. "That is sad, Commander. But perhaps their short lives are why the others do not speak of them. They were here for such a brief time." "Brief?" Vexthar turned to face his young aide directly. His compound eyes reflected the lights of the hall like 1,000 tiny mirrors. "Let me ask you something, Lieutenant. What do you know about humans?" "I know they come from a planet called Earth. I know they are soft creatures with no natural armor. I know they live for less than 100 years. I know they are small and weak compared to most species in the Coalition. And yet," Vexthar said, "when the war was at its darkest, when the Voreth horde was pushing us back on every front, it was the humans who turned the tide. Not the Vorlani with their great fleets, not the Dranari with their unbreakable armies. The humans." Zinala's antennae stood straight up in surprise. "Forgive me, Commander, but that seems difficult to believe. Everything I have learned suggests that humans were minor participants in the war." "That is because history is written by those who live long enough to write it. The humans who could tell you the truth are mostly gone now. But I remember. I was there." Vexthar looked back at the crowded hall. Admiral Kryneth was now standing beneath a large hologram displaying the Coalition symbol, preparing to give her speech. General Morthax was taking his seat at the head table, his 4 arms folded across his massive chest. The other veterans were finding their places, ready to celebrate their great victory. "I think it is time someone reminded them," Vexthar said quietly. "I think it is time they heard some harsh truths about our human allies." "What do you mean, Commander?" Vexstar did not answer immediately. He watched as Admiral Kreneth began her speech, praising the courage of the Vorlani fleet and the strength of the coalition. The crowd listened politely, applauding at the appropriate moments. When Kreneth finished, she invited other veterans to share their stories. General Morthax stood immediately, eager to describe his conquest of Nexus Prime. His deep voice filled the hall as he painted a picture of glory and triumph. Vexstar waited. He listened as one hero after another stood to speak. The Malvari told tales of secret missions. The Thenori described desperate defenses. The Nexan spoke of sacrifices made for the greater good. But no one mentioned the humans. Finally, when the speeches began to slow and the crowd grew comfortable with their drinks and their memories, Vexstar moved. His old legs carried him forward, past the tables of honored guests, past the servers carrying trays of exotic foods, until he stood in the center of the hall. Admiral Kreneth looked at him with surprise. "Commander Vexstar, do you wish to speak?" "I do," Vexstar said. His voice was not loud, but something in his tone made everyone stop and listen. "I wish to speak about the species that won this war. I wish to speak about the humans." The silence that followed was complete. Every eye in the room turned toward the scarred old commander, standing alone beneath the memorial lights. And Vexstar began to speak truths that would change how they saw everything.